But boys like you tell pretty lies. The 5 a.m. low in your eyes says your heart is changing. Now we don't dance like we used to. Silent disco on the floor, baby. Mr. DJ, you get me through. When the beat's gone, you can't save me. Now we don't dance like we used to. Silent disco on the floor, baby. Mr. DJ, you get me through. When the beat's gone, you can't save me. Under those lights, you turn it on right. You're on fire, baby. Still drinking too much has got you losing your touch tonight. Now we don't dance like we used to. Silent disco on the floor, baby. Mr. DJ, you get me through. When the beat's gone, you can't save me, baby. Smoke and mirrors, pretty lights. Another runaway city boy getting too high. But boys like you tell pretty lies. The 5 a.m. low in your eyes says your heart is changing. Now we don't dance like we used to. Silent disco on the floor, baby. Mr. DJ, you get me through. When the beat's gone, you can't save me. Now we don't dance like we used to. Silent disco on the floor, baby. Mr. DJ.
This is Broad Radio. For you, by you. Broad Radio. Here for more.
Hello and welcome to Broad Radio. I'm Jo Stanley and today my co-host is Zoe Daniel. It's so lovely to see you, Zoe.
Good morning, Jo.
It's really fabulous for me to be sharing the show with you today, Zoe, because your insights and your expertise, I think, is really important to us today. We've got a show in which we hope to have some really useful conversations. We're going to be joined by Liberty Sanger, who is the head of injuries at Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. She's going to be taking us through sexual harassment law and what we can do if we find ourselves experiencing sexual harassment in the workplace. Also today, and I don't know, Zoe, if you have found this, I think a lot of parents are asking the question, how can we have conversations with our kids, particularly teenagers, about consent? Are you finding this?
Yeah, absolutely. As the mum of a 14-year-old son, I've thought about this quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, and I have actually had conversations with him. So, yeah, I'm really interested to sort of delve into just how to handle that, how to approach it, what sort of messages to send, and also kind of where's enough, you know, where's the line? When have you done your job there as a parent?
Yes, so at about 9:30 we're going to be joined by Catherine Manning, who is the founder and CEO of Seed Workshops, which is a team of fantastic educators that go into schools, particularly secondary schools, and teach healthy relationships and consent. That'll be around 9:30. And for laughs, because we need it, comedian Kirsty Webeck is going to be joining us and sharing with us the long list of annoying things that she does, which makes it a miracle that she and her partner have just celebrated their 3-year anniversary. Don't ask your own partner what is annoying about you, because I did that yesterday, and it was quite alarming how long the list was. And we introduce you to a fantastic network for women entrepreneurs when founder Sheree Rubinstein joins us to tell us about her amazing network called One Roof. She joins us a little later on. But first, Zoe, it has been a very bleak week in Parliament again. So in just a moment, you're going to bring your insights into the week that has just been after this. Broad Radio is proudly supported by Chemist Warehouse. Chemist Warehouse, great savings every day. So, Zoe, I have to acknowledge that going into planning this show, I felt like I really was very heavy-hearted that we're finding ourselves now, I think, over 2 weeks since Brittany Higgins very courageously came forward and shared her story. And I guess the heavy heart was that I really, that this whole thing is unfolding further and further in Parliament. That there have been more allegations, more stories that we're hearing. And it really upsets me. Firstly, I want to acknowledge that it's upsetting for so many people who are victim survivors themselves, that this conversation and this rolling headlines that we're being confronted with is really hard. And so we have got that 1-800-RESPECT number on the screen there. But it's difficult for all of us, I think, who have had people in our own circles who we may have been supporters of victim survivors. And really the whole conversation is very, very devastating, isn't it?
I think it's really draining. I think, as you say, all women have either experienced a form of harassment or know someone who has at various levels, some more minor, some quite extreme. And it really does send you into sort of a lifelong reanalysis of things that have happened in your past that perhaps you didn't call out, things that have happened to friends, whether you were there for people enough, whether you should have said something, what your responsibilities were. Maybe it's a kind of female thing as well to analyse your own behaviour within that. But I also think that, and you mentioned rightly, people who have been survivors of sexual violence and how this impacts on them. And I think, we're sort of in this situation where we're working through something where people are hoping that we will actually move forward as a result of this, but we haven't necessarily seen any forward movement because we're still kind of in a phase of obfuscation in some ways by the people who have been elected to lead us. And as you said, with allegations now on both sides of politics about senior, as yet unnamed members of Parliament, historical behaviour, allegations that have been made. One particular woman who has since taken her own life as a result, it would seem, of what she says happened to her when she was only 16. And yet we are still in a situation where the powerful men who are accused are still in their positions. They haven't been named. There are questions around reporting, around who knew what when again. And suddenly people bringing forward allegations from both sides of politics and submitting those allegations to the Australian Federal Police kind of as a result of what's happened over the last couple of weeks, even though they knew about these things before. So from all of those perspectives, it's quite confusing. It's really confronting. And for me, at least, it's still kind of a watching brief around, well, what happens now? Does this actually move the needle or not?
Yeah, and I feel like it's gaining some momentum. I'm wondering, is this our Me Too moment?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I've been reflecting on this quite a bit, having covered the election of Donald Trump in the US, who, as you would know, there was sort of a huge scandal where some Access Hollywood tapes came out during the 26 campaign where he was caught on a hot mic talking about grabbing women by the pussy. This followed a very sort of combative campaign with Hillary Clinton, female candidate, and which gave rise to a lot of sexism. Donald Trump was then elected. the Women's March happened the day after his inauguration, where millions of people marched across the US and the world. At that time, it was the biggest public protest that ever happened. And then after that, the Me Too movement, which had kind of been in its infancy since 2006, really reignited, and you saw all of these powerful men called out, and many of them ended up losing their jobs, either resigning or being sacked or exiting politics or business or media or whatever it was, as a result of that. And then you sort of wonder, well, is that why the media in Australia started to focus on what was happening in high echelons of business and politics here? And is that then why Brittany Higgins felt comfortable or more comfortable coming out with the allegations that she's made? And is that then why we are at the place that we're at now? But I think, as I said last week, Joe, the question is, has it changed anything? Will it change anything? Will it just blow over and kind of go back into the background again? Or do we actually force it to move that needle?
Well, I have to say I was enraged over the weekend when I saw this particular tweet, which just reminded me of that moment when Julia Banks stood in Parliament and spoke about the sexist and dangerous environment that women are in. And look at the men. They just turned their backs and walked out. So it's not like they haven't been told. It's not like people haven't tried to have this conversation in the past and they haven't listened. And now look at this. That image of Julia is so isolated. She's so alone. And it really reflects how incredibly courageous women are when they speak up. But it also shows that, well, are we talking to people's backs? Are we talking to the walls?
Yeah, I mean, the photo is just a metaphor for everything, isn't it? And she just looks exhausted,
yes,
as you say, and just completely isolated with all of those suits with their backs to her. And, this is kind of my fundamental question around where we are now. What's changed?
Yeah.
Are we still kind of in a position of making excuses where you've seen Peter Dutton, for example, come out and talk about she said, he said in the context of Brittany Higgins' allegations, some suggesting that's just cop speak from a former police officer, others saying that, that's deliberately placed language to undermine, to insert doubt around the truth of her allegations, which is fundamental to all of the issues around reporting of sexual assault. Of course, the fact that it's so hard to firstly come forward and then be believed and then get any actual action on what has happened or is alleged to have happened to you, and an independent eye over the allegations that you've made. So I really still see this very much as a work in progress. And I think, without going on too much, there's a couple of things that need to happen. And one is that the federal government, and by that I don't mean party political, all sides of politics, need to read the room. If they are representative of our population, if they are to set an example for us, if they are setting a cultural example for the way that other people should behave, then that's the starting point for the way that they should manage this going forward.
Yes. Well, the good thing is there is actually, for all of us, laws in place to protect us and, very clear guidelines as to what our employers should do if any kind of harassment takes place in the workplace. So in a moment, we are going to be joined by Liberty Sanger, who's the head of injuries at Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. She's going to be educating us, I suppose, on what we can do should we find ourselves in a position where we are feeling threatened or there's any kind of harassment taking place for us in the workplace. So that's going to be next on Broad Radio. Well, Broad Radio is thrilled to be working with Maurice Blackburn Lawyers in the next few months to bring some really useful conversations and we hope useful information to you should you have experienced some kind of personal injury or if you have questions with regards to your rights. And we felt that it was pertinent today to learn about sexual harassment in the workplace and what laws protect us. So we're really pleased to welcome Head of Injuries from Maurice Blackburn Lawyers, Liberty Sanger. Hi there, Liberty.
Hi, Joe.
Now, I feel like I should know this, but what actually constitutes sexual harassment in the workplace? Because it's a very varied a set of circumstances, isn't it?
Yeah, and great question, because a lot of women in particular think that comments that they put up with in the workplace are just part of what they have to endure rather than it being sexual harassment. So it's unwanted or unwelcome behaviour of a sexual nature, which a reasonable person would anticipate that would make another person feel intimidated, offended or humiliated. So we've often heard about casual sexism, and I think people know what that is. Comments, brushing up against another person, sharing explicit information via email or text, pornographic material in the workplace, and in its most grotesque form, we hear about physical assaults in the workplace. All of these things, anything that makes you feel unwanted or unwelcome and is of a sexual nature, that is sexual harassment, and that's something that you should be seeking information about what you can do to stop it.
Liberty, where's the duty of care for employers in this? And at what point do they need to step in? I mean, surely every woman could relate examples of what we might describe as low-level harassment in the workplace. As an employer, do you have a duty of care legally to act on that sort of behaviour?
Yes, you do. Every employer has a duty to provide a safe place of work to all their employees. And there's a lot of information out there to help employers figure out what steps they should proactively take. They should be engaging with their workforce about the risks in the workplace and making sure they've got steps in place to eliminate those. When it comes to sexual harassment, what that really means is that you've got to be committed to having a safe and inclusive workplace. And the employers that get this right lead from the top. They have a transparent and openly communicated strategy commitment to a diverse and inclusive workplace. What does that mean? They make sure they've got women and men, people from all backgrounds at every layer of their organisation. They have policies, training. They exhibit the behaviours themselves that they expect to be exhibited in the workplace. And if someone, and it's well known, I should say, what to do if there is a situation where someone feels as though there is sexual harassment in the workplace. So people know what to do, and they know that they'll be safe and supported if they come forward with a complaint. Where employers get this wrong is if they turn a blind eye, they don't have regular training, they don't themselves take steps to make sure that their staff know about the policies. We've got to see this step change. We've got to see employers really taking this issue very, very seriously and making sure that they are proactively creating the right culture at work so that everyone feels safe and included.
I would like to see too a sense of empowerment for all people, specifically women in this conversation, to know that they can actually put their hand up and say, I feel uncomfortable, because often with that low, what would you call it, low grade, low level kinds of harassment, you feel like, oh, maybe I've invited this by having a bit of a laugh with someone, or maybe I've misread the situation, or, I don't feel like it's extreme enough to say anything, but it can actually really affect you. So how do we empower women to actually know that they can say something and act?
That's another great question. I'd encourage everyone to have a look at some guidance material put out by the Victorian regulator, WorkSafe, which makes it really clear that every person, every woman should be able to raise such concerns in a safe way, knowing that they won't be victimised or cast aside or labelled a troublemaker. Quite the opposite, that it will be encouraged and the complaint will be dealt with seriously and that action will be taken. So how do we make sure everyone knows that? Well, let's make sure everyone knows about this guidance material, because all it does is tell every employer what their responsibilities are in case they didn't know it. But the other thing I find is that there are a lot of employers out there that want to do the right thing. They just don't know how to do it. And strangely, even employers feel a little awkward about challenging some of these behaviours in the workplace. So much of it is so deeply entrenched in our culture and the way we interact with one another. I think by really empowering employers as well as employees about what employer obligations are, what employee rights are, and what the standard is that we should expect when a person comes forward with a complaint, that is that it be taken seriously and dealt with seriously, and where there is behaviour that is occurring that is not appropriate, that it be stamped out, that it be backed up with training. In fact, a good example I saw on one of the materials was that if you do see something like this happening, it might be a good prompt for employers to do another round of training about what their policies and procedures are, what the expectations are. And I thought that was very good practical advice. Because the more that the employer takes the lead on this and sets that standard and makes it very clear what the expectations are, the safer that all people will feel about making a complaint that something is unsafe. I mean, I guess a parallel, which I think is interesting, is, if there was something unsafe, another hazard in the workplace, there was a cord everyone kept tripping over, or a piece of carpet that people were tripping on, or there was a light that kept flickering and needed to be changed. People don't hesitate about raising those things, and they are other examples of low-level risks in workplaces. This is another risk. We all know what the consequences are of not taking action on, I'll call that casual sexism. The consequences can be profound. They not only affect the culture, so make people less inclined to bring their whole selves to work and give 100% to their job, but we know that they can have profound impact, a profound impact on people's mental health and long-term consequences to mental health. That is no different to how a hazard that causes physical injury is dealt with. This is the same. We need to start thinking about this in the same way that we would a physical hazard and a physical injury.
I think that phrase, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept, is something that we've been hearing for a long time now. It's just that, unfortunately, it seems to only compute temporarily and then everything reverts back to what it was before. Interesting that you mentioned this WorkSafe guide to work-related gendered violence, Liberty, which, as you said, it's really good. It's quite comprehensive, but it's not complicated. It's easy to read. It's easy to understand. So the information's there. I just wonder, is anyone actually reading it? What's the disconnect between the production of that information and the actual provision of and sort of embracing of it? And then what role does government have to ensure that employers are going down that track and taking those steps that you talked about?
Well, that particular guidance came about after long consultation with stakeholders, and particularly the work of the Victorian Trades Hall Council needs to be credited in bringing that to the fore. And so having brought that guidance about, the next step that I believe that the Victorian government is going to take is ensuring that more employers know about it. What will that involve? Well, it's going to involve them going out and inspecting workplaces and making sure that there is compliance with the guide. And I would suggest that they're going to have to think about where there is non-compliance, issuing the same kind of notices that they would if an employer was breaching physical safety standards. And ultimately, if there is no improvement, they can consider prosecution. Now, they are sticks rather than carrots, but these things work collaboratively when it comes to shifting culture. If we think about where we were at 50 years ago on occupational health and safety for physical hazards, we were well behind where we are today. But these days we see amongst many employers, certainly not all, but amongst many, a vastly improved culture of workplace safety, great pride being taken in workplace safety. When it comes to these physical hazards or machinery or whatever it might be, We need to get issues around conduct and culture being treated in the same way in order to get a big step change in prevention. My own view on what the hesitation is it's so deeply entrenched in culture. We all know, I know, that in order to survive in some workplaces or working environments, that you let 99 out of 100 comments sail past you because you're just trying to get on with your job. So part of what we've got to do, part of what everyone has to do is decide how they're going to respond when these comments are made. It would be much easier to come forward and make a complaint when a comment is made if you knew that the standard that was expected was that you would, and that it would be dealt with appropriately, and you were then left free to get on with your job. But I think the hesitation on many women coming forward in particular is a fear of retribution, a fear of not being included, a fear of not being believed, and a fear ultimately of ramifications for coming forward. We've got to get rid of that if we're going to make any progress on sexual harassment in the workplace.
Liberty, I'm assuming that you have actually had women approach you for representation at Maurice Blackburn who have experienced exactly that, who have felt like they can't speak up and that the retribution was very bad for them. What do you recommend that we do if we find ourselves in a situation where we are certain that we're subjected to harassment in this way? What are steps we can take? Should we keep a diary? Should we be seeking legal advice? What would you recommend?
A couple of things. A diary is actually a great idea. In some ways, it depends where you're at, but my first piece of advice would be seek independent advice. So I would encourage everyone to be a member of a union and to go to their union and seek advice about what to do. I would encourage you to, if you're not a member of a union, seek independent legal advice. The reason you should do that before you do anything is because where we're at right now, we see a very varied response in how employers handle complaints of sexual harassment. And I hate to say this, but more often than not, we see that employers handle sexual harassment complaints badly. Some employers know how to handle it, most don't. In fact, I think we're actually seeing this being played out in an extraordinarily horrific way with what we're hearing from Canberra. But if you get that independent advice from the beginning, you'll be well equipped to know what the options are. The options range from an internal complaint being made, and I would hope then an internal investigation, to going straight to the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission, or to making a complaint to the safety body, WorkSafe in Victoria, WorkCover elsewhere, or all three. There are some key components, though, to any investigation that's undertaken that we would insist upon if a complaint is to be investigated. That is that it be external and independent. It's impossible for an organisation to conduct a fair investigation when they're conducting it into themselves. And many people who approach us have been sucked in to a process that's being undertaken by the employer, only to find at the end, having entered it in good faith, they are very poorly treated. So, I think it's really important that investigations be independent. I think it's really important that they be transparent. I think a really high quality investigation will enable the complainant to see the material and not keep it secret. And then underlying all of that is leadership from the organisation. So the person who's bringing forward the complaint should feel safe and supported at all times. So key for anyone who finds themselves in this situation is to get advice, independent advice, be appraised of the options, and know what you're facing into as you start the process. I would encourage everyone to seek advice. I know from experience, as a person who has seen this happen, as a lawyer, as a friend of others that have been through it, that a lot of us think that we can handle it, that we're expert in it, that we can trust the system. We don't want to cause trouble. We just want this behaviour to stop. And we think that, if we just do a series of small things, that everything will be okay and we don't need to go outside and get any independent advice. I cannot think of an example where I've seen that happen and the woman, the complainant, has ended up being happy with the outcome. So I do think it's critical that people seek advice before they do anything.
Liberty, when you say know what you're facing into, it makes me feel like just rigid with fear. I feel as though any woman who is brave enough to speak up needs to be supported, but also we need to acknowledge that it's an extremely courageous thing to do.
Yeah, and this is where I struggle as a lawyer, because I don't want anybody feeling afraid about coming forward. There is nothing scary about getting advice and finding out what your options are. So don't be ignorant. Know what the options are, and you'll be told by experts whether you've got a reason to come forward and what the likely outcome might be. But I know where we're at in society, and I know what toll it can take, and it's breaking my heart. I'm sure it's breaking everyone's heart watching what's happening to poor Brittany Higgins. The thing that makes me so angry is that we are still at a stage where it's up to the victim to lead a process and to carry the burden of trying to change culture. That's so wrong. It's the employer obligation to lead process. There are clear steps that can be followed. I do encourage everybody to look at this WorkSafe guidance. It makes it very clear. If you read it, you'll think that's all common sense. Well, it is, but it's not being applied by most employers. Again, I say, if the steps that are outlined there had been followed in Canberra, I would hope very much that we would not see Brittany as re-injured as I think she is likely to be today as a result of having to take the courageous stand she's taken. And I have to say, because I'm a lawyer, in response to her allegations, but that infuriates me. So we need to see employers leading the right behaviour, and we need to see women supported when they come forward. I do keep saying women, and I should correct myself there, because it's not only women that suffer this, it is mostly women. But study after study has shown that there are certainly men that are victims of sexual harassment. And in addition to that, if you are LGBTQI, you're more likely to be harassed. That you're more likely to be harassed if you suffer, if you have a disability, or if you are from an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander background. So the challenges that we face are not only related to gender, they are related to all attributes that we present with, which of course comes back to why we need diverse and inclusive workplaces, because all of these attributes are to be celebrated and embraced in a workplace, rather than to be isolated, humiliated, offended, made to feel unwelcome, and to be a reason for suffering sexual harassment.
Well, we do thank Maurice Blackburn Lawyers for supporting Broad Radio at this time. We're going to be welcoming many of your team, Liberty, in coming months to speak about different versions of personal injury, of which sadly there's many. And we invite you to reach out to us. If you have a question that you would like to ask of Maurice Blackburn Lawyers, you can contact us at broadradio.com.au. And as you say, Liberty, we put our arms around anybody who's courageous enough to speak up, because it needs to be a victim-survivor focused response. Thanks so much, Liberty, for your time.
That's my pleasure. Thanks, Jo. Thanks, Zoe.
And we'll have more Broad Radio after this.
In your arena, there's only one race to win, your own. You never stop, never quit, never look back. You push and test your limits until there are none left. Fuel your performance with INC Dynamic Way to keep you going.
Broad Radio, talking inspo we love, info we need, and sharing more of us. Watch and listen live every Tuesday 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time at broadradio.com.au, or find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube and LinkedIn at Broad Radio Oz. Talk to us live. Call on 1300 8 Broad. Catch up on demand anytime, anywhere, every time, everywhere. On the train, we'll be here. 2 a.m. existential crisis? We've got you covered. Broad Radio. Here for more.
Oh, Zoe, it's my favourite time of the week when we get to welcome one of my favourite funny ladies, Kirsty Webeck. Hello.
Hello, how you going?
Well, I think congratulations is in order because you have just celebrated an anniversary with your partner, Elle. Well done. 3 years. Not
Thank
easy.
you. No, 3 years is really long. I haven't done anything for... No, that's not true. I've done lots of things for 3 years, but I haven't had many relationships for 3 years. Yeah, we just celebrated it, and it's a massive triumph because I'm very irritating. So, like, I'm determined to maintain this relationship for the rest of my life. I hope Elle's on board with that because I can't get back into the dating pool, and I just don't know if anybody else would tolerate my antics.
What's particularly irritating about you?
Do you ever just take a moment to have a bit of self-reflection and you have a look at like a lot of your habits and some of the things that you undertake and you're like, oh, I thought I was doing okay, but on the sum of it, I'll give you some examples. I get very giddy at night when I get into bed. I get very excited about being in bed and about being about to go to sleep. And I get a second wind. And I get very, very chatty. And usually, there's a term that we use in stand-up comedy when we just get up and do a really short set called a tight five. And often, Elle will say to me, all right, that's enough of your tight five, go to sleep. And it happens nearly every night. And as I'm brushing my teeth, I always think, okay, just calmly go into bed. How do I brush my teeth, by the way? What's going on?
What are you doing there? You've got enormous chompers.
While I'm brushing my teeth.
You got them stirring in a pot.
Yeah, I need to talk to my dentist about that. But while I'm brushing my teeth, I'll be like, okay, you've just got to go in, just relax, just go to sleep like a regular adult person. But then the second I get under the covers, I'm just so excited to be there and to be a part of this soon-to-be sleeping journey that I'll be like, hey, Elle, guess what happened at my 7th birthday party?
I would not tolerate that. I need complete darkness, peace. Let's not talk. If I could have someone strumming a harp in the corner, I would. I just want total, absolute reverence for the sleeping space.
I think it's reminding me of my 2 children, actually, Kirsty. I've got a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old, and they both get into bed with us every night before we all go to sleep. And they'll be like bouncing off the walls, and my husband and I are like, go to bed, just get out of here. But, there's a lot of synergy in what you're saying between that and my teenage children, to be honest.
Well, you need to stay strong, Zoe, and you need to nip it in the bud right now, or it could still be an issue when they're 38, for example.
But you're still together.
We're still together, and yes, Elle's very good at managing these situations. I think that's why we're still together. I've also got a fixation on certain things when I go to the supermarket. Like every now and then there'll be a new product that I will buy every time I do the shopping, and there's bans in place now. Like we cleaned out the cupboards the other day, and we found out that we have 7 hand washers and 6 laundry detergent. So I think that's saying something about me being clean, which is good, but we don't have a lot of storage space. And I was like, can you stop buying the same products every time you go? Like, laundry detergent will last for a few months, right? And I'm like, that's the clue I needed.
But you see, I think, you call that irritating, okay, but actually all you're doing is providing for your household, right? I think there's a spin on everything that's a bit irritating. Like you were telling me about how you're irritating, I asked my husband, what about me is annoying? Which isn't necessarily a good thing to do because he really came home with a lot on that list, right? But he was like, oh, you're really loud when I'm trying to watch the TV, you're doing the dishes. I'm like, well, probably the spin on that is that I'm doing the dishes. Like, there's a good to every irritating thing, surely.
You and I are on the same wavelength, and when Elle watches this, she's going to be furious that you validated me, because that's how I always pitch it to her. I'm like, well, would you rather we had no laundry detergent? Would you rather I stopped going to the shops every day?
Exactly right. I'm disappointed that my husband.
Every day, by the way.
Oh well, we'll see you in lockdown. Were you stockpiling in lockdown? Did you have wall-to-wall toilet paper?
Yeah, people were panic buying toilet paper, and I was panic buying laundry liquid and garlic, apparently.
Yeah. Well, I asked my
husband. There was a garlic shortage. There was a ginger shortage as well. Garlic and ginger.
It was Kirsty's
fault. I mean, I feel like during lockdown, tiny irritations became magnified into larger irritations. So I have an obsession with lighting candles in the evening. It's part of my sort of serenity vibes. And my husband has a real problem with me putting the burnt matches back in the matchbox, because then when he gets a match out to use, it's already burnt, and it really irritates him. Mm-hmm. And then a couple of weeks ago, I kind of got my comeuppance because the whole family were out, and I was going through my evening ritual of lighting the candles and just getting my chill happening. And I put the match back in the matchbox, and the entire matchbox ignited in my hand. And I had to throw it out the door. So he was right. I shouldn't be putting burnt matches back in the matchbox.
Zoe, that's an extreme example of getting your comeuppance, like it turning into a Molotov cocktail.
Yeah.
Well, in honest truth, I think we're lucky to have our partners and they're lucky to have us. That's my end result. When we have these conversations, you just got to go, oh, well, we're all annoying, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Kirsty. Hey, by the way, you can go and see Kirsty in the Melbourne International Comedy Festival in April. I think we've got the details there. I love that your show is called Chakasiki. Which is, I think, brave coming out of lockdown when all of us felt like we were forced to
It was a bold move. Yeah, a 12-month sickie.
But you can purchase your tickets at just comedyfestival.com.au. Thanks so much, Kirsty. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you. See you both.
And we'll have more Broad Radio after this.
I'm in a new stratosphere.
So, Zoe, we've already touched on the fact that you have a teenage son and a teenage daughter, and I myself have a daughter who's 12, and I'm surrounded by parents who are feeling, I think, really alert to the fact that we have some issues in and around consent and respectful relationships that have been highlighted in the last few weeks. And have you discovered that parents are wanting to know, to be armed with the information as to how to speak with their kids about this?
Well, I think it's a question of how far do you go? Have you already had these conversations with your children, and in what context have you had these conversations, particularly with older kids, whether they're actually already monitoring this news debate that's going on as well? So working through that with them, just, what's alleged to have happened, and sort of helping them understand what the allegations are. And then it provokes some thought for them around, what might they do, be it a girl or a boy, if they were in the particular situation that's been outlined. But it's not an easy conversation to have as a parent, especially with teenagers who are kind of innately not keen to have those kinds of conversations. They find it a bit like, ew, mummy, stop talking to me about that, Yeah. But, in our case, I think we've just addressed it head on and talked to particularly our son about it. He'd be furious if he knew I was talking to you about it, to be honest. But, it's a tricky one for parents.
It is. So we thought that we would go to an expert, someone who actually educates teenagers, runs workshops in secondary schools. She is the founder of Seed Workshops. Her name's Catherine Manning, and she joins us now. Hi there, Catherine.
Hi, Jo.
This is a really difficult thing to speak with our kids about, and you do go into schools and talk with boys and girls around these sorts of issues of respectful relationships and consent. How do you approach it? What's the first thing you mention to them?
Well, first of all, we unpack a lot of the gender stereotyping that happens throughout childhood, which also includes a lot of the attitudes and behaviours that we have basically decided upon by society, by these social constructs, depending on whether we identify as a girl or a boy. So we unpack all of that, and then that sort of flows into more in-depth conversations about relationships and how those stereotypes play out in our everyday lives and in our relationships. And then we go further into that, where we do look at consent. We look at what consent means. We look at the different types of body language, for example, spoken language, the signs of consent, permission, etc., and looking at enthusiastic consent. So for young people, they might think consent is just literally just a yes, but then, there are different ways that we can say yes, and some of those are, I guess, when you were talking before about that line, I guess that's the point where we have to talk about consent in a way that we unpack that line, and that we make sure that we have enthusiastic consent so that our kids know what that means.
So, Catherine, what about in the context of this current situation? How do you address this conversation with kids in the context of what they're seeing on the TV, how they're seeing their leaders behaving? Perhaps parents are talking about it in the kitchen over dinner. There's quite a lot there that perhaps complicates that conversation even more.
Look, it really can. And I think a lot of the things that we're seeing in the media, that young people are seeing in the media, quite extreme, the extreme end of sexual harassment. So if we start with the conversations with our kids where we're talking about things like everyday issues, it doesn't need to even be around sexual consent to start with. In fact, from the time our kids are really little, we should be really teaching them how to set and respect their own boundaries and those of others. I look back to my own childhood, and I think, there are certain moments that I can recall where, back then, compliant children were seen as, that was the bee's knees. Like, your kids are very well behaved, they're very polite, they're affectionate, they'll kiss you hello and goodbye. And I remember a great uncle who I would feel a little bit anxious about going to visit, because he would kiss me in a way that, my lips would actually be wet after he'd kissed me hello, and then we'd have to kiss him goodbye. And then I'd go home feeling quite sick about that. So I think for a lot of us, particularly of our generation, we've grown up with this idea that, just giving ourselves in that way, that just saying yes as, a kiss hello or a kiss goodbye, regardless of how we're actually feeling about it. That's kind of been normalised. So now we're having to have these conversations with our kids, which I think is fantastic, and I think it's long overdue. But, we're all in this boat where we haven't had these conversations really with our own parents. So, it is very new. So I think starting from that point of, how can we assert ourselves? And, we don't have to be necessarily aggressive. We don't want to be passive about it. We want to just be assertive. So talking to our kids about that, and also in the context of, these more serious allegations and encounters that people have in the workplace. And, of course, it's our parliament, so that's also quite shocking in this day and age that, seemingly no action has been taken despite these people coming forward. I think we have to also encourage our kids to talk. And if we open up that conversation at home, we're giving them a safe space to come and talk to us about, if they've experienced anything or if any of their friends have experienced anything. And it opens up that channel for conversation and for them to have a place to be heard and believed. And as you mentioned before, and then seeking some sort of, justice or professional help if necessary.
Catherine, I really love what you highlight there around our girls and boys from a young age being entitled to say, no, I don't wish to hug you hello right now, and to set those boundaries and to be able to express it, not fearing what the reaction will be, because I think you do feel a bit guilty. Am I going to hurt someone's feelings? And then on the flip side, for the person to receive that information, whether it's a boy or a girl, without feeling hurt, without feeling wounded, to know that I have to respect that person's wishes, that's a pretty critical thing that surely is underlying this sense of entitlement that we're seeing at the extreme end of, people harassing someone or assaulting someone.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no shortage of grandparents who get their noses out of joint when parents do say to them, oh, hang on a sec, he or she is saying they don't want a kiss or a cuddle, or they don't want you to keep tickling them. So can you please stop? I mean, we've got to go in and back our kids, and it can be hard for grandparents and other people because they feel like they're being victimized. They feel like you're saying that they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. And look, I guess you really are. You're saying that you need to respect my child's boundaries. And I think it is a really important message because you're teaching your child that their voice is important. And this goes right through their whole lives, that boundary that they set, if they feel uncomfortable, if they don't want to do it, as I said, it doesn't necessarily even need to be about sex, but anything, that their boundaries are respected and that they know how to set them and expect.
It also and it strikes me that, even though these are difficult conversations to be had, both with the kids but also with extended family, that with what we're seeing happening in the media now, although it makes it complicated, it's also a good jumping off point to start these conversations, because it actually opens the door for that subject to be, front of mind and talked about openly.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes the focus off. When you said before about your son maybe feeling a bit uncomfortable, and I know a lot of parents fear that discomfort, but in my experience, when you open the door, and this is a great starting point, once you get that conversation going, you will find that your kids are actually really grateful to have it. And that's the experience that we have when we go into schools and deliver our workshops, that we're having these hard conversations. We're doing it in a safe way, but we're allowing the students to really think about their behaviour. And, even when we talk about people behaving in creepy ways or, doing things that might be perceived as a little bit creepy, sometimes they're completely unaware because they haven't had this unpacking of consent, and they haven't grown up with this idea that, you can't just go and slap someone on the backside because you like them, or, so I think having those conversations as soon as possible. And look, and it's not, if you haven't had the conversations with your kids while they're in early childhood, it's never, ever too late. And in fact, it's not even too late for adults, because as we're seeing, all of these cases recently involve adults. So, there's a conversation to be had around the dinner table with friends, with older family members. It's a whole society problem.
What is the reaction from the students that you speak to, boys and girls, when you go into the high schools and you actually talk about instances where there has not been consent, or when you're educating them around sort of, gender stereotypes, or, what sorts of reactions are you getting from the boys and the girls?
Well, look, we don't ask the students to disclose. In fact, we discourage them from disclosing anything that they've experienced, particularly of a serious nature in the space. However, the conversations that we do have, and we use some high-profile cases of sexual assault, and we unpack the media's reporting about that. We unpack some of the social media type comments and commentary around it, and usually there's a lot of victim blaming, a lot of slut shaming, where people are questioning what a particular woman was wearing, or what she was doing out at that time of night. So there's all these sort of putting the onus back onto the victim. So we unpack all of that with the students, and they absolutely, it's like you can hear a pin drop, and they're 100% intent, and the feedback is always that they were really grateful to have the conversation and to have these things addressed, and things that kids are pretty switched on these days, but there are things that they're experiencing, and particularly in relation to their exposure, for example, to pornography, where there are a lot of scenes that don't appear to be consensual. So a lot of material they're seeing is highly problematic. And then they're seeing in society, obviously with all of these cases going on at the moment, that we've got these leaders, these supposed role models who have engaged in these behaviours. So, they're really putting all the pieces together, and they're ready to understand how they can, A, protect themselves to a point, but B, that they can be also aware of their own behaviours as well towards other people, because, as I said, a lot of the ways teenagers sexually harass each other is quite inadvertent, or they're quite shocked that constitutes sexual harassment. They didn't realise, and once they're armed with that knowledge, they're very grateful for that, and that then obviously sets them up as adults to be much more aware of those things in the workplace, etc.
Well, it's a massive thing that we're undertaking, raising this next generation to hopefully respect each other to the point where we don't have this harassment and abuse anymore. But you're right, it's the adults that we need to address. And I don't know, Zoe, how do we get this urgent response so that people are protected now?
Yeah, this is kind of where we're at this week, isn't it? I mean, we were talking earlier about how it's very much a work in progress. And, as Catherine said, you've got leaders not only in politics, but in business, in media, in the arts, film, Hollywood, who have been, badly exposed in the last couple of years in regard to their behaviour. And, these are people that our kids perhaps treat as role models, which is a really frightening and worrying thing. But at the same time, exposing that behaviour has also opened eyes all around the world among kids and adults. And, that's continuing to happen here over the next couple of weeks. And in my mind, the question remains, what happens next?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Catherine, I know that we can get to seedworkshops.com.au, and you do run workshops in schools, but also you have some parent workshops as well there.
Yes, we do. So, and looking at expanding into workplaces as well. So that's another area that we'd like to target. Clearly, it's very much needed.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're feeling the need from assistance, do check out seedworkshops.com.au. Thanks so much, Catherine.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And we'll have more Broad Radio after this. Well, International Women's Day is on the 8th of March. It is a time in which we celebrate how far we have come towards gender equality, but of course keep the conversation going because, Zoe, we have so much further to go when it comes to gender equality, yes?
I can't even begin to start that conversation.
I know. We would never get off air, wouldn't we? But it's also a time when around the world there are some amazing online events taking place, and I'm thrilled to be a part of an online lunchtime panel discussion which is being presented by One Roof in conjunction, or in partnership I should say, with Women's Agenda, M Time, Verve Super and Broad Radio. It is on the 11th of March and it's free, and you can register at Eventbrite, and it is called Honouring Women's Successes and Sacrifices. So much to talk about there. The founder of One Roof is entrepreneur Sheree Rubinstein, and she joins us. Hi, Sheree.
Hi, Joe. Hi, Zoe. Great to be here.
Tell us a bit about One Roof to begin with.
Sure. So One Roof for the last few years has been well known as the leading co-working operator in Australia for women-led businesses. We were on a trajectory of growth and setting up lots more co-working spaces, and then of course COVID hit, and it changed everything. I lost confidence in the business model, and my fear around what was going to happen and endless lockdowns led me to really pivot the business entirely. I had raised capital with investors and then decided to return the capital, which, not many women raise capital. And so when they do, having to return the capital was a very challenging thing to do, but the right thing to do. And I pivoted the business to a digital membership. So we now support female leaders and entrepreneurs and bring them together under one roof. And since launching in June last year, we've onboarded over 250 women across Australia and even globally now. We've hosted over 100 online events. We hosted one of the largest female founder pitch nights last year, and we've had really great success amongst our members, and I'm having lots of fun.
Sheree, you've got a great story about what One Roof was literally when it was a co-working space, and how exciting that was to have this building in Melbourne sort of buzzing with people. How's it felt, I guess, to have to either shelve or at least pause that and turn this into a virtual experience, especially, as you say, when you raised all that capital, which is so hard to do?
It felt like, for a moment, it felt like an immense failure. I was very narrow-minded and very focused on the path that I was on. And I looked to the wing in the US as a great example of the kind of business that we were always different to the wing, but, they were having great success, and I really wanted to be the wing for Australia. And so it felt like a failure. I felt I'd failed my community, myself, my investors, my advisors. But I think over time, very quickly, I've realized that there's so much power in the online, and I'm actually really enjoying it. And I feel grateful that I have been able to return the capital to my investors. They are, warm investors now who are interested in what I'm doing and are interested to reinvest again in the future. So, I've held great integrity. I've done the right thing. And I guess I've turned what, could be the worst situation for a business owner into an opportunity. And so, pivoting and really harnessing this online world now as kind of the focus and the business model, and then still bringing people together in person, but really basing the business model off of virtual digital membership. Yeah, it's been a great opportunity, and I have to take it as that.
And I'm really inspired by it too, Sheree, that you can kind of face that inner voice that tells you are failing and going, no, this is the right path for us now. I don't think that's an easy thing to do at all. So I'm really inspired by that. Can you tell me, why is it you think women need women-only spaces?
Oh, where to begin? I guess I come back to a statistic that I can't get out of my head, that I think about all the time, and that is that the World Economic Forum estimates that it could take well over 200 years to achieve true gender equality worldwide. when you pause and think about that, we could be living on Mars if Elon Musk has his way well before we achieve gender equality. And I'm sure the pandemic has made that gap, even further. And so whatever we're doing, we're not doing enough, and it's not happening fast enough. And the closing that gender gap, we're not accelerating it quick enough. And 51% of the population are women, and yet we are missing from decision-making tables in all areas, from government to startup to entrepreneurship to business. And so obviously a lot more needs to be done. From my experience running One Roof over the last 6 years, creating spaces and programs and opportunities specifically for women, there is a lot of power in that. The dynamic, creating a safe space for women to be open, to ask questions, to share their specific and unique challenges as women. That's not to say that creating a space for men isn't just as important, with the right intention and the right curation, as well as creating spaces for men and women together. And so I think there's a place for all of those things, and it has to be very intentional with the right facilitation and curation. But yeah, I've seen the power of bringing women together in a space where they can be very open about their challenges, particularly around parenthood, or whether they've kind of sacrificed becoming a mum at the expense of building their business, and the challenges that they've faced and the barriers they've faced specifically as women. And I think it's much harder to have those conversations without the dynamic of a women's space. That said, One Roof has never been exclusively female only. So we've always had men involved and male members in our community.
And of course, you're all about, with One Roof, bringing women together, because supporting each other is critical to our progress, just worldwide, really, essentially. So what's really exciting is that Broad Radio has the opportunity to join One Roof, the digital membership, at a nearly 50% discount. So if you head along to One Roof and put in the discount code Broad Radio, you get that membership, lifetime membership of a discount, which is so great. Thank you so much for that offer there, Sheree.
Thanks, Jo. Thanks, Zoe. Pleasure.
And I can't wait to see you for our event on the 11th of March.
It's going to be great.
I tell you what, talking about successes and sacrifices, where do we begin?
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be a very juicy conversation, and we love to really talk about, what really goes on behind the scenes.
Zoe, I should ask you, would you be able to name off the top of your head a sacrifice that you have made towards the success for yourself?
No, I don't. I think I need to think about it, which kind of says a lot, doesn't it? I mean, really, we're all just paddling under the water, not necessarily deconstructing how we're doing it. And maybe we should do that more, and then kind of go, well done, you.
It's so true. Well, thank you so much, Sheree. Get along to One Roof and take advantage of that great discount for the membership there. And hopefully we'll see you when we do our amazing event on the 11th of March. Register at Eventbrite. You take care, Sheree.
Thanks. Bye.
Because, I mean, you are extraordinarily accomplished and you've done some amazing things in your career, and you have just released your new book.
Oh, Jo, it has been quite a mission, a head-splitting exercise, shall we say. Donald Trump, subjecting myself to another 7 or 8 months of writing this book about Donald Trump and then trying to release it in the middle of a pandemic. It has been quite interesting, to say the least. But the book is a thing. It does exist.
Yes.
And it is now in bookstores. Thank goodness.
Yeah, there it is. Greetings from Trumpland. Of course, you have written this book having been in America during his reign, if you'd like to call it that. And so you had a particular insight there. And I saw your exercise books of which there were many, in which you took all your notes along the way. So the process itself
Yeah,
is
they're all
fascinating
sitting
to me.
next to my desk still. There's about 20 of them sitting there. I'm old school in when it comes to notes, but we don't have a lot of time. But I would just say to people that the book it does talk about how Donald Trump got elected and why he came to power, but really it's about the future in many ways, because it's about all the things that he changed, why people support him and continue to do so, how that's overflowed internationally in various ways politically. And there's a lot of awareness raising in this book just around people disconnecting from each other and not being able to have conversations with people that you disagree with, and the fact that that's really sort of polarizing people and sending people to the margins, which I think is really dangerous in democratic societies. And we need to do something about that if we're going to kind of move forward together and promote good leadership and good policy and just sort of a good environment for all of us to exist in without sort of arguing with each other all the time.
Oh my gosh, Zoe, I feel so disheartened when I see how people are unable to have conversations without being completely at loggerheads. Because is it that we can't have enough empathy to hear the other person's point of view, or what is it? It just upsets me so much.
Yeah, I don't know. Everything is so combative now. And I think, people do, maybe they don't put themselves in situations where they have conversations with people with the reverse point of view to their own. And, I've sort of made a whole career out of looking at a prism and being able to look at it from all sorts of sides without judgment. So it won't be a comfortable book to read in many ways, because a lot of it explains the perspective of Donald Trump supporters and, why they chose to shelve some of their ethics around some things in favour of other attributes that they thought that he brought to that role. But it does speak a lot about loss of hope and what people were looking for in a sort of anti-politician, a renegade politician, someone who was anti-establishment, who would bring something different to the US. And, these are tactics that have been adopted by politicians the world over. And of course, fake news, the erosion of trust in authority and all those sorts of things are now, a pervasive global problem. So these are all the sorts of themes that we explore in this book. And I think, it's a book for people who are just simply interested in changing social attitudes and social policy and politics, but also for policymakers who are kind of considering, what do you do with those 75 million people who voted for Donald Trump and all those people who sympathise with his points of view and the way that he approached leadership around the world? You can't just pretend that they're not there just because he's no longer the president.
Or just because you don't align with their beliefs. Of course, their beliefs are valid and very powerful as well. I mean, I'm going to read the book because I want to be alert to what is out there in our leadership that perhaps I may not have been educated on. So I can't wait to get my hands on it. Thanks so much for being my co-host today, Zoe. It's just been wonderful to have your insight.
Always a pleasure, Jo. Thank you.
Thanks. And we'll have more Broad Radio this time next week. We'll see you later. Have a great week.